Hi. There's a lot of law around water. Very little of it has to do with what I was just doing, actually. The majority of international law around water, or regional laws and, country-to-country based agreements, etc. around water, has to do with security and transport. So it's actually navigation and movement on water. So it's like, where does my border, if I'm on the sea, happen? Like, when do you need my permission to come up in your boat to my coast? Or how are we going to use or not use this water to bomb or not bomb each other, etc. That kind of stuff. So there's a wealth of stuff around that, but there's actually not all that much to say about how we govern this kind of use between countries. So, today, 5 minutes on international water law, and there's little enough that we actually can do it in 5 minutes. And all my law professors at Edinburgh next year probably just turned over in their not graves. Sorry. I'm Rebecca Farnum, this is Rambles with Rebecca, and today, international water law. And so we're talking about, the water between nations, used as fresh water for domestic purposes and irrigation and manufacturing and that kind of stuff, right? So the fresh water that we think of as water rather than, as something to sail on or whatever. Okay, so issue 1, the 1992 Dublin Principles, big happy agreement that stated 4 things. 1, fresh water is finite, it's vulnerable, and it's vital, right? Okay, so fresh water is something that's limited, but is necessary and we need to pay attention to it. 2, participation is going to be necessary in governing water resources. Okay, so everyone needs to be involved. 3, women in particular, and the gender role, have a particular vested interest in water. At the time, this was fairly radical, 1992, right? I mean, so explicitly naming the role of gender and the fact that around gender there are inequalities in access to and control over blah 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 environmental resources. That was a big deal. Now it kind of feels like women check. But there it is. And 4, and perhaps in some ways the most important from a water management perspective, the Dublin Principles say that water is an economic good and should be treated as a resource, such that it has a price, you can buy and barter it, etc. There's a big paradigm and debate around water security and in water justice theories about whether or not it's okay to treat water, which is so essential to life, as an economic good and be able to bottle it and sell it or somehow copyright certain kinds of water and that kind of thing. But there's those 4 from the 1992 Dublin Principles. In 1997, we have the Convention on the Law of the Non-Navigational Uses of International Watercourses. Alright? Generally speaking, it's just called the 1997 Watercourses Convention. And that whole shbula in the middle is basically saying, this is about law of water that isn't used for transport basis, right? Okay, so it's getting away from the traditional bits on the transport issue. And that says basically 2 things that are brought up and, highly relevant. 1, no significant harm. So the way that countries use, take, dump things in water cannot cause significant harm to their neighbors. And 2, equitable and reasonable use. This is particularly around when there's a transboundary water, right? So a river or a lake or something crosses a border. Equitable and reasonable use. You go right ahead and try and define what equitable and reasonable use mean. Shockingly, countries use those 2 words to mean a lot of different things depending on what their position is and how much water they want and have had and etc. etc. So both of those shape kind of the way countries talk about water resources and think about them. As with most international laws, they don't have a lot of teeth. There's not some water police going around, and there's a lot of debate over what they even really mean. But there they are. Most of them, the 1997 convention is not ratified fully, so it really basically has no teeth. It's a voluntary agreement, as a lot of international laws are. And then the other aspect that I'll bring up briefly is the fact that water is now considered a human right by the UN, and with that comes a whole string of what are our actual international legal obligations around when something is a human right, who has to provide it, etc. So there you go, international water law.